Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. My name is Zachary Strong and I am a physicist, psychology researcher, and biblical scholar. And today I'm going to be sharing with you the working definition for consciousness that I've developed, which I think is probably one of the best definitions out there. So, if you do any amount of deep research into psychology, you'll find that they lack definitions for certain key terms and ideas. So, psychology actually does not have a definition for self, it does not really have a definition for mind, and it doesn't really have a definition for consciousness. Okay, like we're all aware that consciousness is this thing that we seem to have, but psychologists have not been able to put their finger on what exactly consciousness is. And I think I have a working answer, a working definition that I think there's practical applications. It'll probably help you, even if you're not that into psychology. I think knowing this definition will help. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through some of the research that I accessed in order to come to this definition, and then I'm going to talk about the definition. Okay, so very early on in my research career, I researched intuition. I was interested in intuition and particularly expert intuition. So there are some experts and professional sports players who are able to come to correct conclusions very, very fast. So tennis players, for example, are able to react to things within hundreds of milliseconds, which is faster than conscious rational thought. And doctors, like radiologists, people who study MRIs and so on, they're able to pick up on things within MRI images within, again, hundreds of milliseconds, which is faster than rational thought. And fighter pilots are the same way. They can react instinctively to things. Chess players can look at a chessboard and very quickly come to certain conclusions. And so experts are able to come to impossibly fast conclusions that are correct. And so I was curious about like how does that happen? And so the first paper that I ever wrote is called The Bicameral Expert on the Neuropsychology of Intuition and its Role in Modern Society. And what I found in the psychological literature was essentially that intuition, expert intuition and intuition in general, is basically pattern matching. It's basically the brain matching patterns. So an expert radiologist, for example, has seen thousands of MRI images, right? They've seen thousands. And so they have a very well developed set of patterns in their mind. And so when they look at a new image from a patient, their brain, within hundreds of milliseconds, compares what they're seeing to whatever patterns they've learned throughout their career and can come to an intuitive decision very quickly. So intuition is basically pattern matching. That was my first clue. Now, the second clue that I've come across actually comes from Jordan B. Peterson. If you read his book, Maps of Meaning, you'll find that almost the entire book is based on a single discovery in Soviet neuroscience, which became known as the orienting reflex. Now, the orienting reflex is basically something that the Soviets discovered where the brain, which is pattern matching, instinctively focuses on things that don't seem to belong. They don't seem to belong. And I'll give you an example of this, okay? Your brain is going to focus on something as I play the piano, and you're not going to be able to avoid noticing what's going to happen. You're gonna focus right in on it, and it's gonna pop out of your brain, okay? Oh, right? What I did musically was I was playing chopsticks and I made a wrong note on purpose. Okay? Your brain probably picked up on, hey, that's not how the song goes, right? It was instant. and it was instinctive and it was unavoidable. You can't help but notice that something did not belong, you know? And so basically all of maps of meaning is centered around the orienting reflex and the consequences of that neurological reality in the brain. And again, it comes down to pattern matching. It comes down to pattern matching. Your brain is pattern matching and it picks out things that don't belong. So that's the second piece of research that I've come across. Now, the third piece of research is some of the hottest neuroscience available today, which is known as the free energy principle, something developed by Carl Friston. So the free energy principle is essentially showing that the brain does the kinds of things that I discussed. It's pattern matching, it's finding out what doesn't belong, and it does so in order to resist disorder and resist chaos. And in order to, do this, in order to pattern match, the brain is always comparing what it's getting from its sense data to its mental model of the world. Okay, your brain has essentially a model or a map of how the world should go or how it thinks the world should go. And if its sensory data does not line up with that, it creates a mathematical difference. And then the brain works to resolve that difference in a number of different ways. Okay? So those are the three pieces of research that I've accessed, or three of the pieces of research that I've accessed. So we have intuition is pattern matching. The brain is a pattern matching machine. We have the orienting reflex, which is the brain instinctively notices things that don't belong. And we also have the free energy principle, which is a mathematical expression of how the brain does this pattern matching. Okay? Now, based on the general direction of all of this research, my working definition for consciousness is, how exactly can I phrase this? Awareness of difference. Consciousness, essentially, is awareness of difference. And you might be wondering, okay, what exactly do I mean by this? So, let's use a plant, for example. Okay, we'll use the example of a plant. So, you might have noticed that plants, especially sunflowers, will turn towards the light source. They'll turn towards the sun. And at some level, what a plant is doing is realizing, oh wait, like I'm in the shade right now. I want more sun. I'm going to orient towards the sun so I can photosynthesize more and so on. Okay, so the plant is essentially aware at some level that its desired state, which is getting lots of sun, and its current state, which is not getting sun, are different. And so the plant will take action to get more sun, to close that difference between desired and actual. Okay? And animals are the same way. Okay? Animals also compare what they want, right, versus what is actually happening, and the animals will take action to run away from predators or chase down food sources or whatever. Okay, so there's this awareness of difference in the plant and animal world between what is actually happening in the environment versus what the plant or animal wants to happen in order to propagate itself and survive and so on. Okay, so there's this awareness of difference in terms of environmental data. Okay, and humans are also the same way. Humans are also the same way. So if you're walking down the street, you're walking down the street and maybe you hear a big explosion or something, right? You're going to take action to get away from that, right? Because what you desire in the environment is a relatively peaceful environment with no explosions and so on. And so if an explosion happens down the street, you're going to move away from it probably because you're like, oh, I don't want this trouble in my life, right? I want a peaceful environment. So humans also have this awareness of difference between what they want and what is actually happening. Now, the challenge for humans is that there's another layer to consciousness, which is what we intuitively associate with consciousness. And that is the awareness of difference between concepts and ideas. Concepts and ideas. Okay, plants are not philosophers. Animals are not philosophers. Human beings are the only species that we know of that develops philosophy and has all sorts of, ideas and concepts and things that we debate and so on. Okay? Humans seem to be the only ones who have like actual self-awareness, you know? Beyond things like, oh, I'm hungry and I'm tired and so on. Like we actually have self-awareness. And that is what we typically associate with consciousness and higher consciousness. Okay, so what do I mean by this? Okay, I'm gonna give you a bit of a metaphor or a story. Okay, so let's say you are a manager at a company. Let's say you're a manager at a company. You've got a team of people that you're managing and so on, and you think you're doing really well because you're hitting your numbers and blah blah blah. You get called in for your annual performance review, and the leadership team, your bosses, say, hey, like, you're hitting your numbers, things are good in that regard, but we've received some complaints from your team. Your team, the people that you're managing say that you're not very nice. Now, up until that point, you thought you were a great manager, right? And so this feedback that you're getting that you're not so nice to your employees is a big surprise to you, right? That is an example of how consciousness grows. Because what you're being made aware of in that moment is a difference in your self concept. Okay? A difference in your self concept versus what you actually are like. Okay? There's an awareness of difference here. Of, oh, I thought I was a perfectly good manager. But it turns out that yelling at my employees and threatening their jobs and other behaviors, like, this isn't creating a good working environment. Okay, so there's an awareness of difference that you're being made aware of, right? And very often where I see a lack of consciousness or troubles with attaining proper consciousness has to do with self-concept and concepts and ideas in general. Okay, that's where humans really struggle. That's where we've struggled for thousands of years. Okay, because, like, to go back to this example, right? A lot of people in that situation would deny it. Would, like, in the manager situation, they might deny it. They say, what do you mean? Like, I'm perfectly good to my employees. Oh, they're just being too sensitive. Oh, one of them wants my job and they're all turning against me because they're jealous of me or whatever. Okay, so what we have is something called self-deception. Okay, and a lot of people engage in self-deception because they can't necessarily handle the accountability of seeing themselves clearly. Okay, and that is actually, from the working definition that I have, they are refusing to be aware of difference. They are choosing to be unconscious. They are choosing to be unconscious. Okay? And this happens a lot. Like, I'm sure you've experienced people who struggle to be accountable. I'm sure you have encountered, people who don't take feedback well, who deny mistakes that they've made and so on. And chances are you've done this yourself as well. Okay? This is just a factor of the human condition, right? But there's also problems when it comes to concepts and ideas out there in the environment, you know, and we see this a lot in, like, debates, right? Like, there's a lot of online debates and so on that are happening, and typically what happens is people get caught in contradictions. Okay, like, I'm not going to pick on anyone in particular, but I've seen a lot of debates where someone is advocating for a certain political ideology or a certain religion, And then the person that they're debating with brings up an obvious contradiction. It's like you say this, but your holy book says this. It's a contradiction. Or your political philosophy says this, but you behave in this way. There's a contradiction between what you say you value and how you're actually behaving. Okay? Very, very rarely, if ever, do I see people in debate situations take accountability in the moment and say, hey, you know what? What you raised is a really good point. Okay, like, my holy book says this, but I'm behaving this way or whatever. Or my political ideology says this and we're all behaving this way. That's a really good point. I have to go and think about that now. Right? That's called accountability and honesty, right? But you never ever see that in debate environments because people are trying to win elections and maintain power and so on. And so very often, in online scenarios, people choose to remain unconscious. They choose to remain unconscious. They deceive themselves about the nature of differences in concepts and ideas. They deceive themselves. They just stay unconscious. They stay ignorant. Okay, and our society is what it is because of it. Okay, and so anyway, to bring all this back to the working definition I have, consciousness being awareness of difference. Okay, there's a simple definition of consciousness, which is awareness of difference between your desired environment and your actual environment. Okay, in terms of like, like I want my environment to be this way, but there's an explosion in the street. Okay, so now I have to do something about it. Okay, to get back to the environment that I desire. Okay, so there's that awareness of difference in terms of environmental stimuli. Okay, plants have it, animals have it, humans have it. But the aspect to consciousness that, we struggle with, particularly as humans, is awareness of difference, of things that we can only perceive with our mind's eye. Okay? Because concepts and ideas and the differences between them and behavior and so on, like a lot of that stuff is basically invisible. It's basically invisible. And so it actually, it's easy for a lot of people to remain unconscious of various differences and contradictions and so on. Right? It's very easy for a lot of people to do that. But when we look at people that we call enlightened, people that we call highly conscious, okay, they are typically very, very, very self-aware. They're aware of the feelings that they have. They're aware of their motivations. Okay, and there's this popular thing now called shadow work, which is being aware of your dark side and your darker motivations. Okay, and that's a form of consciousness growth. Okay? And so the so-called enlightened people and highly conscious people, they aren't just conscious of their environment. They're also conscious of what's happening internally. And they're conscious of contradictions, of different ideas and philosophies and ideologies and so on. They're conscious of the contradictions and the differences in kind of the mind and so on. And that intuitively, being aware of those things, we associate with higher levels of consciousness, right? Higher levels of development and so on. And so that's why I think that awareness of difference is a good working definition for consciousness. Because intuitively, we associate awareness of difference, environmentally and especially conceptually, we associate that kind of awareness with higher consciousness already. And so I think that's a good working definition. And especially given some of the neuroscience that's come out on this issue, right? A lot of what the brain does in terms of consciousness is pattern matching. It's matching things and comparing things, figuring out where differences are between desired and actual and so on. That's what the brain is wired to do fundamentally. Right? So to me, it would make sense if our working definition of consciousness captured the neuroscience that's been developed on this issue. And so I think awareness of difference is probably a good working definition. Now, if you're interested in developing your own consciousness, that's a lot of what I do in terms of my work and what I try to do as you know, a psychological researcher and a coach and whatever. And so what I've actually done is, based on my 10 years of research and my 10 years of experience in higher education and so on, I've developed a series of guided journals which are designed to build the cognitive, emotional, and relational capacities that form the foundation for, you know, the kinds of consciousness that we aspire to. So I've got one called Thinking with Integrity, which has to do with critical thinking. I've got Wise Mind, which has various mental skills and attitudes related to wisdom. And this is based on lots of research, obviously. I've got Active Intellect, which is a structured method for reflecting on yourself and yeah, it's a structured method for reflection, which is used, interestingly, in things like nursing and social work. I've got Go to Yourself, which is self-discovery and purpose. So this is, you know, the classic Discover Yourself journal. I've got Peacemaker, which builds relational skills and specifically conflict resolution skills. And I've got All the Feels, which is a guided journal designed for emotional intelligence, understanding the feelings that you might be feeling, understanding where they're coming from, and so on. And so really what I've done with these 6 journals is I've given people a toolkit of cognitive skills in terms of critical thinking and wisdom, emotional skills in terms of emotional intelligence and emotional awareness, and also things like relational skills, realizing, you know, here's how to handle conflict, here's how to set boundaries, here's how to do these things. And so in my work as an educator and a coach and psychology researcher, the skills that I've developed here, you know, and the journals that I've developed, these are the foundational skills that most people should have. But school doesn't necessarily teach these things. Because of generational trauma, people don't always learn these things in their families of origin. And if you want to learn these skills, you know, in the world, therapy and coaching are very, very, very expensive. And these journals are not nearly as expensive as therapy and coaching, you know. For the price of a single therapy session, you can have the equivalent of like probably $10,000 worth of support, right? So I'm trying to Robin Hood the industry, I suppose. But anyway, so that's kind of what I do, and what I'm trying to do is, you know, get these things out into the world, give people the skills and capacities that they need to achieve consciousness for themselves, you know. But it all comes down to, as far as I can tell, awareness of difference. Awareness of difference. This doesn't belong. This is a contradiction. This doesn't make sense. You know? And being able to admit those things to yourself and navigate through, you know, contradictions and things not making sense and things not being right, you know, that is, you know, I suppose you could say that's the work of a lifetime, and that is, you know, as far as I could tell, the essence of consciousness. So anyway, thank you very much. I hope you enjoyed this. If you want to read some of the papers and things that I've written on this, you can check out my website, zacharystrong.net. All of my papers and so on are available for free, and you know, I've got a few books on Amazon available as well. So lots to dive into if you're interested. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can always email me and so on, and happy to talk. Thanks very much, and enjoy being conscious.